Hey, everybody. Good morning. Without any further ado, I'm on with my longtime friend. It feels like a long time. Former,
It's been over 10 years.
it's been over 10 years. Yes, right. Former Oakland District 3 Councilmember Lynette McElhaney is here. And we're going to talk about really, she's going to educate us because that's really what this is about. This is sort of a teach in regarding Police Chief Lerone Armstrong, the Oakland Police Department, and our federal monitor, Robert Warshaw. So, Lynette, I am blessed to have you here. Thank you so much, Harry.
Well, thanks, Zenny. I'm happy and delighted to be with you today to try to give people a little more background as to the true state of Oakland policing, or policing in Oakland. And, my focus has really been on Chief Robert Warshaw, um, who is Oakland's longest standing uninterrupted police chief.
Yep, yep, yep. By
Yeah.
the way, if I'm looking down, it's because I'm putting you on social media. So,
No, that's cool. It's really important that people really understand. In some ways, Oakland has been made a mockery, based on the rapid rotation of police chiefs in our town, and without really understanding the superstructure of our public safety. People would think that we've had a lot of turnover, but in fact, we've had no turnover in the top cop for Oakland, which is Chief Warshaw. And because he is the highest paid public safety servant, in the community, I think people really should know his role, and his duties, because of Mr. Rorschach's own self advocacy. He is paid more than the city administrator, more than the mayor. He has been given, extraordinary access to taxpayer monies with an untethered checkbook, and people should really understand what that is. And I think what I would like to draw is some increased scrutiny, and some checks and balances to the unfettered power of Chief Warshaw.
and so, how do we get into this mess, Lynette? In terms of him having what, and we're talking off the phone or on the phone, what seems to me to be a constitutionally questionable relationship with the city of Oakland. Who, what elected official put Warshaw in charge?
No elected official put Mr. Warshaw, Chief Warshaw, in charge. So let's be clear, right? The stories of Oakland's policing is an American policing story. Um, we know that it has its roots in bondage and tyranny, and for decades, people in Oakland were subject to all kinds of police abuse and brutality and abuse of power. And two local Oakland attorneys brought suit against the city for, the tyranny of particularly Black men in our community, a case that became known as the Ryder's case. It's Delphine Allen was the named plaintiff in the case, and several other men who had evidence planted against them. They were subject to abuse. The court found wrongdoing in that case. And whereas in many other communities, this grotesque cover up, this band of criminals within the department would have led the department into a consent decree with the Department of Justice, Oakland's elected officials chose a hybrid model, a negotiated settlement agreement, so that Oakland did not lose absolute control of the department, um, which I think has proven problematic. This sort of hybrid thing, um, it, it's I had argued when I came onto the council in 2013, cleaner accountability lines of authority would have been made through, the the typical lose control of the department completely, allow it to be kind of rebuilt from the inside out, piece. And but we didn't do it that way. We chose a negotiated settlement agreement, 2003. My conversations with John Burris back in 2013, they really had hoped that this would be a 3 to 5 year deal. It has now been greater than it's 20 years now that we've been in this agreement. And it has not proven to be an expeditious way for us to get the implementation of 21st century policing practices in a timely manner.
Right.
And Zenny, what's really been incredible to me is that all of the reforms that we point to now that have happened within the department, like say the broadest implicit bias examination, which is happening in partnership with Stanford University and Jennifer Eberhardt's work to look at implicit bias in policing and to then look at training so that you can, undo or decolonize the thinking that all Americans have. That was an internally generated solution that came from our officers. An Oakland officer actually brought forward that idea and that relationship. When we think about the independent civilian oversight within the department, also did not come from Chief Warshaw. That came from the advocacy of our community. So you think about the Coalition for Police Accountability and the people of Pueblo who advocated with the city council for policy and budgetary shifts. When you think about the independence of the Inspector General's office, again, that come from the voters, all of the things that have led to serious and significant reforms within the department have not been generated from the negotiated settlement agreement. It's been from the ongoing advocacy of plaintiffs' counsel, Jim Channon and John Burris, as well as the public itself. And we have a much reformed department. But to the extent that we've continued to have struggles within the department, I lay those at the feet of Chief Warshaw, who took it upon himself to change and modify the negotiated settlement agreement and to concentrate the power and authority broadly within himself for Oakland's fixes. And yet, I think we are in the 12th or 13th year of his contract. You're looking at this journalistically. I'm trying to go from memory. But let's say it's 13 years of his leadership. He has failed to provide the internal controls and the oversight necessary to prevent the scandals like the horrific thing that happened with Celeste Gua. That happened under his watch, and while he had broad authority to enact changes and to do personnel changes, and he failed to protect the public, and yet he throws that failure at the foot of the chiefs that he rules over with what I consider to be a type of tyranny and a fear-based leadership.
But should we? No. Here's another question. I don't think a number of people know this. Excuse me. Where is Robert Warshaw based?
So he currently lives in North Carolina. I'm told, and I have not verified this, kind of he's purchased a large plot of land. Some people have said an old plantation, like literally. I was like, what? So I have not verified that, but he lives in North Carolina. I'm told, how people can buy plantations now and it becomes their home or whatever, with lots of land. But his last job as police chief was chief of Rochester, New York, I believe. He was in New York. And when I think about the image of 20th century policing, of a cadre of police who were steeped in unconstitutional practices, it's that generation of Chief Warshaw. Chief Warshaw is a white man whose last policing gig was in New York. I've not been able to verify that Rochester, New York was a bastion of constitutional policing during his tenure. And what troubles me is that, 13 years, or maybe he's been in business now, I think close to 20 years in his consultancy, that you don't see any people of color on his roster. I think one white woman on his roster. And if he's making his money on selling the fact that he is the hope of a turnaround in communities that have violated the rights of Black people and people of color and other people of color, but primarily in communities that have been caught mistreating Black men, one would think that he would at least have a Black man from law enforcement from social services, from somebody on his team, but he does not do that. And so for me, I don't know that Chief Warshaw is the fit. I see him as a chief in the 20th century model, not necessarily given to 21st century practices. And unless somebody in the press can show me a track record of him as chief with 21st century policing wins, then it's quite questionable to me that he's the most effective guardian of the trust for the public. And again, Chief Warshaw and the cops on his roster have given us, they have destabilized Oakland PD. So you and I can think about any large organization where you need systems change, and systems are difficult to change. Would you agree with me that you need stability at the top from a credible leader with a backbone that can drive and sustain systems change? You need at the helm someone who becomes impervious, right, to the whims of middle management or lower ranking file members who are resistant to change. You have to have stability at the top if you're going to have reform in an organization. But under Chief Warshaw, he tosses out police chiefs like I toss out tissue. I mean, it's so horrible. The Daily Show had a whole entire skit on the changing guard, like within a 5-minute skit, like we had like 8 cops. Right?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
It was horrible that you could parody a city as significant with significant public safety challenges because Chief Warshaw whispers to the court or to the administrator or to the mayor to terminate a chief, as opposed to correcting the chief and correcting behaviors. Also, I find it quite interesting that he criticized Chief Kirkpatrick for her adjudication in that horrible case where Joshua Pollock was murdered or was killed, right? An officer involved death. I don't think we can technically say murder because that's not what was adjudicated, but where Joshua Pollock lost his life at the hands of an officer in OPD.
Right.
So 2 investigations found that the officers were not held criminally liable for his death. And today, those officers are back on the job after Chief Warshaw ordered their termination. He overrode the decision of Chief Kirkpatrick because he is our chief. Like he gets to do that, right? He overrides her decision, and it cost us millions of dollars in a lawsuit. And we had to restore those officers to those jobs. Chief Kirkpatrick had made the right call. She did so in accordance with the law and the rules and the oversight of both the court, the state, the federal government. And Chief Warshaw unilaterally made a different call, right? And it cost us a whole bunch of money. And yet if he were a football coach, you're a sports guy, with a win-loss record of Chief Warshaw, would he have that coaching job today?
Well, today he would have been fired within less than a year.
Okay.
So no.
So when I look at the advocates who are rightly concerned about Oakland having a department that is constitutionally sound, I would say, right? But I mean, to those advocates who believe that the negotiated settlement agreement has kept us safe, I would say in the past 20 years, you can look at the loss of lives. You can look at the loss of lives under Chief Warshaw, right? The policies he failed to put in place that said, when we looked at the Oscar Grant protests, right? It was under Chief Warshaw that those officers did not have proper guidance because we pay him $1.2 million a year to have closed every gap, right? That's what we paid for, that he's supposed to train all of our chiefs and our leaders to the highest standard. And if after 20 years of oversight, the vast majority of that time being under his watch, again, as both compliance director and as monitor, then the failure of this department should be at the foot of Chief Warshaw, not any of the interim chiefs that have served. I mean, in the case of our most current chief, what has it been, 18, 19 months?
Right.
So, it's very questionable to me. And I think that the public has a right to know and should know of Chief Warshaw's broad authorities, both in terms of policy and budget. And you know, you can ask me questions about this most current one, but again, in the beginning, Zenny, of the negotiated settlement agreement, the plaintiffs' counsel, in consultation with the court and the city, they created an apparatus that said, okay, to get Oakland in shape, let's use a sports analogy, right? To get Oakland in shape, we're going to have a monitor, somebody who comes along every 3 months and says, what is the fitness of this team? But on the day-to-day, we're going to give you a compliance director, a kind of chief's coach, a chief's chief. And the compliance director's job is to look at your systems and practices, look at the safety plans put out by the chief, begin to examine those things, and to give coaching and feedback to put the organization in compliance over the 51 tasks, right? 51, 52 tasks. One of the first things that the superpower known as Chief Warshaw did was to get the compliance director, Thomas Frazier, fired. And he's become the sole authority, both as our fitness coach and as the person to say whether or not we're fit. So there is no checks and balance, right? He is the sole authority. And if we have failed to be in compliance with the tasks, as compliance director, he has failed his job. He has not performed well. And as the monitor who says he has not performed well, he should fire himself.
Have, thanks to now on leave Chief Armstrong, a Department of Risk Management that is actually supposed to be headed by Deputy Chief Alicia Mendoza.
Yeah.
Now, what you were saying should be under their watch. Well, my question is, first of all, why didn't that happen, or didn't? Because I'm still trying to figure that out myself. But also, who, given his distance, does Robert Warshaw get his information from regarding Oakland?
I don't know. He has a monitoring team who are all remote. I think that he sends in people either through Zoom or something once every 3 months. I think they rely on the department to provide information to them for their review. And I will say this around Chief Armstrong.
Angelica Mendoza. Thanks for the
Chief Mendoza, I mean, not Deputy Chief Mendoza, Chief Armstrong, in his brief tenure as chief, was responsible for the first time in our history of getting the department in compliance and with Chief Warshaw sign off into sustainability on all tasks under the NSA. So when we talk about high performance, and think about this is during a COVID-related spike in violence. That has been, reminiscent of taking us back to the horrible, horrible days of the 90s. Triple digits, right, in terms of death. Significant triple digits in terms of shootings. Double-digit increases in violent crimes across the board and property crimes across the board. Sexual assault. Right across the country, we've seen these COVID-related spikes in violence, and yet in the midst of this public safety crisis, the leadership team, which would, I guess, include Deputy Chief Mendoza, that team worked very diligently and strategically and brought us into compliance. And people should know that right now, Oakland is poised to come out from underneath the $1.2 million superstructure of Chief Warshaw for the first time in over a decade. With the court's
$1.2 million refers to what we pay him, by the way, folks, annually.
Yeah, $1.2 million that's paid but his extraordinary open-ended checkbook takes us well above the $1.2 million mark. He has more discretion than the city attorney, than our Treasury Department, than the mayor with respect to the budget.
Well, given that, did you meet him when you were a council member?
No, No, I only spoke with Chief Warshaw one time on the phone. He would not come and present to us in closed session. He refused to do so,
Why?
though he had authority to do so. And it was really unnerving for me as a council member, because often the criticism of the court would lay blame at the foot of the council for not taking the reforms seriously. But we were often walled off from critical information from making policy decisions by Chief Warshaw himself.
Did anyone ask why he was doing that?
Of course, we asked why.
And the answer was
Because he didn't want to.
oh, my Lord.
Because he didn't want to. No one can make Chief Warshaw do anything. He is a sole power to himself.
He has a truly authoritarian presence, is what you're saying.
Truly. And I will say again, like, if anybody wants to just look at the pattern and practice of Chief Warshaw. He promises and dangles compliance in front of every mayor and every chief. And he selects the chief, y'all. He selects the chief. The mayor has the authority to appoint the chief. And now the voters have given the police commission influence over the chief's decision, right? A selection process. But ultimately, not only the chief, but the chief's entire command staff has to be blessed and approved by Chief Warshaw. And he gives a wink and a nod to every chief, every mayor, as to whom he wants to place in positions. And I think he sets these chiefs up with the promise that, you, chief, you're the next one up and the price is right and you're going to be the winner. And then you and I are going to write the book on Oakland, and every mayor gets the same promise. And then I've watched him flip on the mayors. I mean, you got to think the first chief that I know he had influence in terminating was the very popular, strong chief Anthony Batts.
Yep.
And it's because he claimed that he couldn't work with Chief Batts, who was arrogant, in his words. And then he wanted.
Isn't that racist? And we're talking about a smart black guy.
Yeah, and so he gets Chief Howard Jordan, who was his pick. And then he turns on Howard Jordan, and Jordan, who thought he had enjoyed a long tenure in Oakland, I think almost 20-year career, respected, had risen through the ranks. Another black man who I would say he lost his career in scandal, mostly because of the way in which Chief Warshaw characterized him. And then, we end up with a series of interim chiefs. When Mayor Kwan, let me just say this while it's on my mind.
Sure.
Mayor Kwan was pilloried. Is that the right word? Pilloried by the press for her 100-block strategy, which was a data-driven strategy that was driven largely by research conducted by the Urban Strategies Council, a Black-led organization. At that time, I believe Julius was still at the helm of the organization. And they were really looking at what is now in the parlance called stressor beats, right? Mm-hmm. Those communities where you have a high concentration of poverty, a high concentration of public safety concerns, of violence, of health concerns, of environmental concerns. And what Mayor Kwan was attempting to do was to focus in a strategic way, not only policing resources, but parks, public works, right? How do we go into these 100 blocks and really concentrate our efforts, leverage them together? And she was pilloried by that, and I think not supported well by the super chief Warshaw, and it was wrong. Well, it was driven. I think, he made a mockery of our mayor and of our police chief at the time, Anthony Batts, who could have worked. And I'm making this up. My sense was, as a freshman council member, that he was driving division within the organization to turn the mayor against the police chief, to turn the deputy chiefs against the police chief, to play off of the righteous and right indignation and anger from the public to keep us at odds with one another. And of course, the police are unpopular in low-income communities, because as much as we need policing services, we are also often subject to police abuse. And so you can always toss a police chief and not get the public behind you, because the public be like, well, they must have done something wrong. And in that shadow play, Chief Warshaw is absolute power, absolute authority, and no accountability.
One thing, though, we have to not forget the words of our friend, now former Oakland District 7 Councilmember Larry Reed, regarding Quan and that 100 block, because Larry called the mayor a liar about, I don't know if you remember, did you ever see that little episode there? Remember that?
No. And I don't want to focus in on past things.
Okay.
I met with Mayor Quan. She was the first mayor I served with.
Yeah.
And I understood her desire to follow the data and to lift up this work that Urban Strategies Council had performed, so that we could concentrate our efforts in the communities where it was most needed, both in terms of violence prevention, the first iteration of violence prevention, right? Our Measure Y dollars. And when you look at any of the reports, right, whether it's looking at the Head Start reports or you're looking at the Oakland Fund for Children and Youth reports, whenever you look at the reports all come back to there is an overlay of concern in our communities, many of our flatland communities, and how do we better leverage public dollars and philanthropic dollars so that we are really serving effectively those communities. I mean, you go back to Safe Passages almost 30 years ago, right? That produced the Youth Ventures JPA. Again, looking at education, environment, and economics as a way of serving our communities better. And Zinni, every leader, you're going to be able to point to and say, hey, that effort didn't quite get us there, because we only know what we know until we gain awareness and we shift and we bring more people into the conversation. You have to have a start in order for it to improve, right?
Right.
The iPhone 1 had more technology than the technology that sent Armstrong to the moon. And yet no one today wants to put the first iPhone in their pocket. I think we're on like 14 or 15, right? Yeah. You're going to improve knowledge. You're going to improve at every step. And the 100 block strategy, which never got off the ground for being pilloried in the press, was the first level of being able to look at the data, to look at what now our Surgeon General would say, the ACEs, right? The ACEs, these indicators. What are these indicators that we can look at around public health, and how do we then shift those public health, public safety dollars in a way that make us more safe, and where people are treated as citizens and not as problems to be solved? Yeah. And in those stress now, you look at homelessness. You can look at homelessness as well as violence. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Larry's going to see this and bust a gut and call you over that specific issue, because he absolutely lost it regarding that program and how the mayor administered it. And I'm not saying
it never got
gaslight, you know.
But I want to say the program never got administered. It was brought to the press in the concept phase, and it never got implemented. And again, what she was attempting to do was to lift up the incredible data work of a nonprofit organization, the Urban Strategies Council, that had been started by Angela Glover Blackwell. Right. So what I look at is there was an attempt to really elevate the brilliance, what we would call, the brilliance of community, of Black community, to serve the needs of the Black communities that are in distress, right? This was Jean Quan embracing what we would want people to embrace, are the people from community. And when you look at the work that Urban Strategies Council did, it was by interviewing real residents in those communities, right? It was looking at the data. And today, what do we know as best practices? We say community-led, data-driven. And Chief Warshaw doesn't have any sensitivity to any of that, has no accountability to any of that. And what I was talking about was like Warshaw's ability to discredit the people at the helm of the organization. but he starts first by wooing them. And I call it wooing or grooming people to be in his confidence. And I saw him do that with Mayor Schaaf, who succeeded Mayor Kwan. I saw him do that with a succession of chiefs, including Chief Went, who he helped pick or have get chosen for that job, and then failed in his duties as compliance director to strengthen the chief or to create a climate where the chiefs would turn to the compliance director and want then to be honest and forthright, knowing that you have a compliance director who's not being paid to be a rich snitch, right? To go to the court to snitch on you, but to actually help you get better.
Former council, before we go too far down that path, I want to share this exchange with you, which I think is valuable to the conversation regarding the 100 block issue, because this is what happened. And I think you'll find it illuminating.
I don't think that with respect, let's table that for the 100 block issue. Let's stay on Warshaw.
Well, wait, it's only a few minutes. It's not long. Have a look, but it's fascinating. Watch. It's fascinating. Watch.
I actually support curfews, and she did some legislation, but Mr. Reed did not want to introduce it at that time. I'm curfews for particular areas, not citywide curfews.
Couldn't get it out of committee. You were on the committee. You were on the committee. I couldn't get it out of public safety committee.
Later, I'd actually support a curfew that was aimed at hotspot areas and not the citywide curfew, because I don't think we have enough resources for a citywide curfew. I also, on the gang injunction, it just basically, it seemed that if we did more target injunctions rather than doing wide areas, again, we wouldn't have been caught in long lawsuits. We were caught in a lawsuit that cost the city over $1 million and delayed the implementation a year. I supported the North Oakland gang injunctions, so it's never, I was against injunctions, it's a question of how they were implemented. And at that time, the chief agreed with me.
Hey Larry, did you come to the press conference knowing that she was going to,
No, I just wanted to hear what she said, but I knew she was going to come back and say, yeah, the plan, the numbers were wrong. I mean, you would too. When you thought it was a 2-day story and that when you came back, it was going to be a non-issue, but you guys keep asking questions and writing stories, so she had to do something.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just a taste of it. So, and there is more to that, you know.
But you know what's so interesting, right? Who the public doesn't see in that is the superstructure of Chief Warshaw of the Monitor, who bears no responsibility for our community that is in distress.
Right.
That there's no care or concern for how destabilizing it is for victims' families when we lose a chief. In the 8 years that I served on council, I would have to spend 3 to 6 months reorienting each chief or interim chief on the priority of victims' families, of cold case resolution, of being able to implement and sustain change. And it is extraordinarily destabilizing. And so I really trust that Mayor Tao, who said that she's placed the Chief Armstrong on administrative leave to give her and her team time to review things. I trust that she and her team are really going to review this. And when they find the rat is named Warshaw. If there are serious and significant concerns in the police department today, it's because the longest standing chief with the broadest authority for change and implementation of change has gone without accountability and no transparency. So let's talk about this report. That was supposed to be the bombshell that led to the chief's non-disciplinary administrative leave, right? So in this report filed on January 18th, There are a number of errors in the typewritten report that contradict themselves, but we won't go there. Section 5 that starts on page 9 starts with 8 recommendations, A through H recommendations. So the first recommendation, Zenny says, OPD should require all personnel involved in the investigation, review, supervision, and approval of IAD, that's Internal Affairs Division, and CID, Criminal Investigation Division cases to conform to the recusal standards of applicable policies. Now, that seems pretty straightforward, right? It's a straightforward, common sense recommendation.
Right.
This recommendation should have already been put in place by Chief Warshaw 10 years ago. It's his job, $1.2 million, over $20 million spent to date, y'all, to give us this common sense policy decision. But he instead gave a contract, no bid, contract to Clarence Dyer and Cohen LLP. I don't know if this is his friends, but I know what I was able to ascertain from the public record is that at the time that I looked, there was over $825,000 spent for a recommendation that we already spent $10 million to get. Okay. Recommendation number 2, or recommendation B.
Oh, and by the way, that can buy a lot of tiny homes. Don't you agree?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yes. Okay. OPD should adopt a policy that requires approval and documentation of all changes to draft reports of IAD investigations. Now, I am told by officers outside of OPD that this is a common sense 21st century policy. And again, why did it cost us $800,000 to get this recommendation that we've already paid the Warshaw Group to give us? Best practices, 21st century. A policy recommendation of this level might have come through, how about fully staffing our police commission? $800,000. That provides a lot of staff for the independent and the strengthening of the IG, the Inspector General's department. But let's go on. So this is just a policy recommendation. The bombshell report. Recommendation C. OPD should adopt a policy that requires all briefings regarding ongoing IAD investigations to be documented. So my understanding is there is a documentation system here, but if it's inadequate to date, this is what we pay Chief Warshaw to look at gaps and to do an analysis of gaps and to provide strengths. So if there is a gap today after him being on the job for 13 years, again, Zenny, you're a sports dude. Would a general manager who is required for policies to be up to date for any sports team, hockey, football, baseball, basketball, would that general manager still have a job if he's being paid $1 million a year?
2 million. No.
No. Okay. Recommendation 4. OPD should adopt a policy that requires the chief of police to read reports of IAD investigations before signing them. You tell me what CEO of a Fortune 500 company would read absolutely every report that deals with HR.
That's not that person's role.
No, no CEO would have that.
No.
And a policy that would require that would mean, it's my understanding that we get about 1,000 to 1,500 investigations within the police department annually, right? And as our population grows, you would expect that number to grow, right? Just statistics. Do we want a police chief that is leading, visioning, strengthening, observing on the critical cases? Or do we want him reading and signing off on every IAD case? I think that is extraordinary. And I don't know that the police commission would adopt said policy, but I would think the chiefs or the chief's designee, including deputy chiefs and others who are responsible and paid big dollars to have discernment, leaving the most critical cases to the chief's review. But that's just my opinion. I editorialize on this editorialized recommendation.
Real quick, that gets me to my concern that there may be other deputy chiefs perhaps Ms. Mendoza, and I know people don't like my saying that, but that may be influencing the federal monitor over the current police chief.
You know
Because
what? Let's go there and let's talk about that. But let me get through the 8 recommendations so that the public will understand what's in the so-called bombshell report. Right?
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So the 5th recommendation was OPD should adopt a department-specific policy regarding acceptable personal relationships between sworn members and when and how those relationships must be reported. Again, if this is a best practice, why do we not have this in place 13 years after Chief Warshaw has been responsible for the reviewing and implementation of our departmental policies? What I can tell you from my sources within the department, Chief Armstrong has led to a review process that completely makes anonymous those cases so that he and his other leaders could be recused from bias. So nothing comes to him with, Officer Abraham, Officer McElhaney. It comes Officer 1, Officer 2. No gender, race, or name, rank, or identifications, right? So that you're just looking at the facts of the case. Maybe ranks are included, but not the names and faces. It's been anonymized so that when they're discussing in these chief meetings these things, they can remove or mostly eliminate the opportunity for bias. Recommendation, again, nothing here about disciplining the chief, right? The recommendations are all policy recommendations. Recommendation number 6, F. OPD should review its implementation and training regarding the policies governing use by OPD members of OPD-issued cellular telephones and personnel cellular telephones for all department business, and to prohibit the use of personal cellular telephones for work-related communication. Okay. Again, we have a citywide policy and a statewide policy that went into effect when I was on council that said the use of my personal phone was subject to public search as well, right? All phones used for public messaging could be subpoenaed, could be queried, could be made available through a public records request. So this is state law. And even if it's not in the regs of the department, articulated in the regs of the department, it still applies because it's state law. Secondarily, we have a city attorney's department and Chief Warshaw responsible for the annual updating of the regulations manuals to include this. We did not need to spend $800,000 to get this recommendation. What was that, number 6? Recommendation number 7. OPD should revise its rule regarding physical fitness for duty to explicitly include mental health. We agree. And I think the police commission that makes policy recommendations would agree. And you know what? There's state advocacy that's speaking about the mental health and mental fitness of people, not only, in these high stressor jobs. Wow. This is a bombshell report. Bombshell. And mind you, this is 5 years after we had the suicide of an officer following the suicide of his wife on mental health. If this is not included, all under Chief Warshaw's watch, if he did not expressly
by the way, that extends from this
and put this recommendation
issue,
right? If he did not expressly put it in there, I would say Chief Warshaw is derelict in his expertise and in the advice and consent he's supposed to be giving to this department. Recommendation H. This is the final one. Dun, dun, dun. Give me some dramatic music.
Ta-da!
OPD, through its Office of Internal Accountability, should review and improve its policies, practices, and training regarding investigations of members accused of criminal misconduct to ensure rigor and accountability. Really? We have an Office of Internal Accountability. We have a Department of Risk Management. We have more investigators in IAD to investigate complaints against departments than we have homicide investigators to bring to justice those who do harm, the greatest harm in our community. We've got the watchers watching the watchers, and we have, in addition to that, we have an independently elected city auditor. We have now an independent police commission reviewing and making recommendations on policy. You have the policy body of the city council itself. We have all of that. And yet, the one person responsible for giving us policies and practices 21st century to give us a constitutionally sound, effective police department has no checks and balance and no check against his failure to have put these common sense 8 things into practice until now. It was his job to do so. And so to me, we have placed on administrative leave the most effective chief we've had in a decade, who needs the credibility and backing of the council and this mayor so he can do the hard job of stabilizing this department, training young officers, building the morale to give people the strength to do change on a sustainable way. And I sense, because I've seen this like Groundhog's Day, Chief Warshaw finding some kind of bombshell to drop, like he withholds information, times it just right to go back to the court. And a 6-month extension, Zenny, is a 3-year extension, because what he will say is, well, we need a new chief, not we need this chief to be strengthened, right? Not we need to hold the officers involved in this to a different standard. They need to be disciplined or terminated. We need a new chief, which means a new chief search, which means at least a year of doing a chief search, which then once we appoint a chief, you now have this chief taking a year to get up to speed, to build relationship. And by the time you get to year 3, you're in an election year for our mayor. And now you're at the turn of a new turn of leadership potentially, or in the way that humans just behave. We don't know what's going to happen in the lame duck before the mayor is reelected, or we get a new layer, because we never know what the voters are going to do. And you continue to destabilize Oakland's essential life-saving, life-preserving, property-protecting, property-preserving division of public safety. We have a three-pronged safety apparatus. You have the Department of Violence Prevention, right? That's dealing in these critical areas. You have
which, by the way, you created.
I helped champion. The people created. The police department and the fire department, right? These are the essential apparatus of our public safety as we know it. And then we add to this our Department of Human Services and our Department of Parks and Recreation and Youth Development for looking at the public health and the prevention and strengthening of life enrichment things. And yet, with this one that has been given broad authority by the state to carry a gun, right? We are continuing to play the carousel of leadership, and it's so dangerous to do that. And this is no bombshell. At best, what it says is Chief Warshaw has failed to give this department proper guidance and training in his duties as compliance director. And if there's anybody to be held to account, and I trust this mayor and this council will do it, is that they will look at Chief Warshaw, a 20th century cop, a white man with a all white team from out of state. And I think that they will question his efficacy in this work, and they will restore Chief Armstrong, because this community has long cried for what? African-American officers, Oakland officers, people from the hood, people who know our lived experience. Chief Armstrong is exactly what the community has wanted. Someone who can know every neighborhood without using a GPS, someone who has deep credibility. And I know I'm not telling you something I've heard. As a council member, when we've had to bring in criminals, people would turn themselves in to then Captain Armstrong and nobody else, because they understood that they would have a fairer chance at being brought into justice rather than having any random officer with a gun seeking them in the streets, right? So that's who we have currently as our police chief. And I do want to say that I trust this council with the council is one that questions seriously policing practices, right? This is a wave of young council members who have come in on a wave of defund, of questioning authority. And I think that they will see behind the curtain the great Wizard of Oz, the great Chief Warshaw, and that they will remove the curtain and see that this longest serving chief has failed to deliver on the reforms this community has demanded. And if we're maintaining the structure of the NSA,
About the federal monitor, by the way.
yes, federal monitor, compliance, Chief Warshaw.
Right.
If the court deems that we are to extend the NSA, I think the court would be derelict in their duty to leave Warshaw in place, because after more than a decade, he has demonstrated that he is incapable of delivering a department that meets the court's test.
Let's talk about this for a second with Ms. Mendoza. And I know that Chief Armstrong has been quite forthright in trying to make sure that other line officers aren't brought into this for scrutiny. But the fact of the matter is, there is a Department of Risk Management. There is Internal Affairs. There's also another office that Deputy Clifford Long, along with Ms. Mendoza, is part of. That's risk management.
Mm-hmm.
With it begs the question, with Warsaw being so physically distant, it seems to me that it's also a two-way communication. That is, someone within the city of Oakland's police department could use a connection with him as a kind of way of infecting their own alteration of how things are done in the police department. You see where I'm going with this?
I do. And, though I cannot corroborate that, I have heard over the years that one of Warshaw's tools is to ingratiate himself with people in the command staff that he has helped select. Right? He has broad access to every officer. He can call up any officer because he is the chief. Right? They all have to address him as chief. Nobody calls him Mr. Warshaw. They don't see him as a federal compliance director. None of that. He is the chief. And so Chief Warshaw has broad access to everyone in the department. And it has been my understanding that he has used this tactic to say to those beneath the chief, once he's begun to discredit them, that you're going to be my next choice. You're going to be the obvious choice, blah, 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 blah. Just give me something, if you catch the chief, right? It's kind of like that thing you see in authoritarian societies. And in this case, we used to say in Oakland, snitches get stitches, but in Chief Warsaw's case, snitches get riches. Yeah. He's the snitch, right? He when he found this case, his obligation and his duty of loyalty to the chief and to the reform effort of the court was to bring it to the chief's attention and to make corrections immediately in real time, right? Not to send it out for a 4-month investigation.
Right.
He took this information in, did not come back to the department to close the gaps, and then wanted to snitch on the department that he oversees to say, oh, they continue to fail the test, and tell that to the court, and to tee up plaintiff's counsel to actually ask for another extension, which I've said publicly, Stevie Wonder can see that he has 1.2 million reasons to not see this department ever stand on its own and begin to groom and grow integrous leaders from within, but to continually destabilize the department.
And I have to ask you, doesn't it seem out of organizational norm to have somebody on high, rather than be directed only to talk to the current police chief, be able to talk to any of the officers below the police chief? That in and of itself sets up an environment for backstabbing, don't you think?
It does. It's the whole entire system right now. If it served us after that grotesque violation of human dignity and constitutional rights in the Delphine Allen case, if the NSA was the best we could conceive of back then, it has proven to be an inadequate structure now.
The
Because
NSA is
built
folks is
on
the negotiated settlement agreement. I'll write that down. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, the negotiated settlement agreement. We can now see that it is rife with conflicts and perverse incentives, right? There's no bonus paid to Warshaw for getting us into compliance faster, right? He's not incentivized to have policies written quickly, to have training done rapidly. He is incentivized to continue his job. I call it his perpetual pension plan. He's getting a pension from Rochester. He's getting a pension from Oakland to the tune of 1.2 million, because I mean, this can go on forever. He's nearing 80 years old, I'm told, right? He's in his someplace in the mid 70s to 80s. You're a journalist, you'll find his real age, right? He's an old dude.
I'm a blogger, not a journalist, but go ahead.
You got journalistic tendencies, whatever. You're a research dude, right? Like he has no incentive to get out of this. He doesn't need another contract around the country. He's got a pretty plush job right here. I'm told he's not stepped foot in Oakland, California in 36 months. In 36 months. But our checks keep going to North Carolina.
Yeah, that's
right?
crazy. Yeah, doesn't that, to me, I will say, to me, it looks like an unconstitutional relationship.
I can't speak to the constitutionality of it. I want to speak to the practicality of it.
Sure.
I'm from the town, right? I'm of here, and we are a no nonsense community.
Mm-hmm.
And if it don't make sense, or as the young people would say, if the math ain't mathing, people in Oakland's community are going to raise the question. The NAACP, I went to their rally in support of the chief. Mm-hmm. Their first demand, or one of their top demands, was investigate Warshaw. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the right call. Who is the auditor right now that the court should assign? I don't know. Maybe it's Courtney Ruby. Maybe our city auditor may have the authority to look at his expenditures, his procurement processes, and his performance. Because on the things that he is tasked to complete as the compliance director, if 13 years after he's taken that job, we fail to be in compliance, there's not a defensive coach that would still be on the roster with the 49ers that failed to get the defensive lineup working right. Like and we're not talking about life and death when it comes to sports, but anybody with the win-loss record of Chief Warshaw in any line of business, if he was a FedEx general manager, he'd be canned.
Yep.
And yet the court continues
there's no one to can him.
Right? The court, until now, we've always looked at the rotating chiefs as the failure. But I really want to draw the public's attention to our longest serving, broadest authority chief. That chief of the Oakland Police Department is Chief Robert Warshaw. And I think he makes a mockery of our community. I think it's laughable that an all-white team can show up anywhere in this country and claim to be the team with the best expertise to get officers in compliance to not do harm to Black and brown communities. I think that's laughable. Let me tell you. We had the horrific case of Brandy Martell, a trans woman who was murdered in downtown Oakland, right?
Yep.
Horrible. And the police department's response to that tragedy was unsavory. Right? Now, all of the reforms, including the implementation of sensitivity training to the trans community, did not come from Chief Warshaw. It came from trans activists who met with chief after chief, captain after captain, sergeant after sergeant, until, and shout out to Transform, to Tiffany Woods, and to the advocacy groups who made our department more humane. But that reform that we now celebrate as a best practice, that we now export to other departments around the country, did not come from the $1.2 million we spend in reform efforts. It came from our own community.
And arguably, we now have the infrastructure to really, if you will, police ourselves. I mean, you really laid it out very well to the point where we really don't need his involvement.
We
We could
don't.
we could take that 1.2 million and spend it on, tough sheds.
Or, I mean, if people want to continue to put it into the oversight infrastructure, then let's professionalize or strengthen the professionalization of the police commission. Let's make sure that all of the investigators inside the CPRA, the Citizen Police Reform Agency, make sure that CIPRA has all post-trained investigators so that we can take on a broader, more investigations or concurrent investigations to the IAD. Let's make sure that the money that we're spending in oversight and accountability go to the Inspector General's office, so that that department that is led right now by an incredibly respected leader in Michelle Phillips, like, let's put the money in the departments within Oakland itself, so our checks are being recycled in a way that gives us true sustainability and transparency within our governmental structures, where by state law, by city charter, we have transparency and accountability and a checks and balance. Zinni, we're not going to get to human perfection. We're not. There's going to always be an officer or a civilian employee that operates outside of their training and outside of the norm. That is going to happen. The question is, have we invested in the internal systems where these things can come to light? So let's go back to the bombshell just real quick.
Mm-hmm.
The case by which Chief Armstrong has been put on a non-disciplinary leave of absence. The system, it appears from what I can read in the publicly available report, the system worked. Chief Armstrong disciplined the sergeant in one case and had initiated 2 investigations, a criminal investigation and an administrative investigation. Chief Warshaw interfered with the natural processing of these investigations and took them over. And rather than adjudicating them within the department, let's say for strengthening, for learning, for capacity building, he then says to plaintiff's counsel and to the court, this is evidence that he needs to keep his job. When I see it completely opposite, the failures here, the policies that are missing here are Chief Warshaw's responsibility and his failure. It's evidence that we do not need him because he's asleep at the wheel at best, and perhaps unethically absent, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at best, he's asleep at the wheel. He has taken this contract for granted. He has not brought his A game to Oakland. And I think it is time that Oakland does, as Detroit has done, that we terminate the contract with Chief Warshaw and we bring in somebody more capable. If we're going to continue to use an external structure, we need to have the ability for our city auditor to review their performance. And maybe we look at their performance annually, and if they're not effective, that we turn them out. But we need, and I think the public is owed a compliance director that is going to actually invest in making our chiefs more effective, not destabilizing our department, demoralizing our rank and file, and not giving us a vision or a system that we can count on.
Lynette, this has been a valuable teach-in, to say the least. I want to have you back because we've been on now for an hour.
Yeah.
And this is, and I would love to go another 3 hours.
No, we're not going to do that. But also one thing, Zinni, if you haven't seen it, there is a letter that the police commission put out last fall,
mm-hmm.
demanding that Chief Warshaw put in place metrics of success. Because if you can, to believe it or not, after 13 years of having this contract, he has never put forward performance measures.
That's right. He hasn't. You're absolutely right.
That's a dereliction of duty.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right about that.
Right. And when it took the civilian arm of volunteers to send this man a letter demanding that he clarify his subjectivity and that he put in performance measures that were objective, again, I say that points to his failure in his contract of what he said he could do for and on behalf of the citizens of Oakland. And it is my sincere hope that plaintiffs' counsel that has worked so diligently and continues to advocate for the safety and security, the humane treatment of every resident of Oakland, that they join and unite with the NAACP and others in this community, demanding transparency and accountability for Chief Warshaw's performance, and that we send letters to the court, that we begin to examine Chief Warshaw's failure to perform, failure to put in place the apparatus that this recommendation from, I want to get it right, Dyer and Cohen, that Dyer and Cohen has given us. Because what Dyer and Cohen shows us is that we've been spending $1.2 million for policy improvements that the Warshaw team has failed to deliver. And it is time now for us to look for somebody else in that role and to prepare our own city infrastructure to take on this role long term. And shout out again to the advocacy groups that passed LL, for the police, for the Coalition for Police Accountability, for others who have now given us the infrastructure. It's now time for us to take the $1.2 million that have been given to the outside, to North Carolina, and invest that money on the inside so that we have the training, the tools, and the resources to do this incredibly important work. So thank you, Zinni, for
thank you.
Time.
For taking the time.
I hope that this has been beneficial. Anybody who wants to reach out to me can do so. They can email me, Lynette McElhaney@gmail.com. I'm on socials. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. Please don't use Instagram, though. I'm not good at it. I am on Instagram, Lynette McElhaney, but I'm not good at that. LinkedIn as well as on Twitter at Lynette McElhaney. So it's my pleasure to serve my community now as an advocate, as a voice, as a bereaved mom, as an angel mom, as a member of this community that has suffered police violence and police neglect. I deserve a department that has stability and accountability. I'm speaking on behalf of the mothers from the Family Support Advocacy Group of the Violence Prevention Coalition that has been working diligently now for 4 years to make sure that we have an apparatus to deal with victims' needs and cold case resolution. I'm speaking now on behalf of the families whose children are kidnapped and trafficked on international. We need our chief to be stable. We need a stable command staff. We need the shadow chief to take seriously our public safety needs and to stop playing games with our chief. So do your job, Chief Warshaw, and do the honorable thing with resign from this work and give us back our chief, Chief Armstrong, who has been serving honorably for more than 2 decades. And thank you, Zinni. Thank you for the platform. I appreciate it.
Don't go anywhere, Lynette. Stick around in the background. You don't have to do anything. Folks, thank you very much for watching. And thank you, Keisha, for sharing this around and making your comments. Thank you, Derek Sue, for your comments as well as Mr. Earl Jacob, too. Everybody.
Hey, Earl Jacob. I can't see who's here, but hey, fam.
Earl Jacob right here. That's he just posted. So, yeah, there he is.
Thank you, Earl. Hey, Earl, text me. I want to invite you to this leadership convening I'm hosting this month. You need to be in the room.
Hey, there you go. And there again is her email. So, Lynette, don't do anything. I got you. Everybody, subscribe to Zinni62. Please share this and bookmark OaklandNewsNowBlog.com and my newly refurbished Zinni62.com. And we'll be back. I was trying to do my Arnold voice, but this is not working. Anyway, stick around with that. I mean, that ends this broadcast, folks.